There's something haunting about anticipation, not the loud kind, not the hype, the countdowns, the trailer reactions, the quiet kind, the kind that sits in your chest when you realize the stories you've been watching for years are finally moving towards something irreversible, when the arcs you thought would stay in your imagination forever are suddenly real, animated, breathing. One Piece has reached Elbaf. Re:Zero is entering its 4th season. Witch Hat Atelier is being adapted. The fantasy anime landscape isn't just continuing, it's transforming, and with transformation comes a very specific kind of fear, because these aren't just shows anymore, they are promises we've been keeping with ourselves. They are the stories we told ourselves we'd see through to the end, back when we were different people, back when the world felt different. And now, as they step into their most crucial chapters, we have to ask ourselves if we're still capable of witnessing what they are about to become. Fantasy has always carried a strange weight in anime. It's the genre that asks the impossible and makes it feel inevitable. It's the space where trauma becomes magic systems, where loss becomes prophecy, where the things we can't say in our own lives get spoken through swords and spells and ancient curses. And right now, in this moment, the next wave of fantasy storytelling is doing something older fantasy never quite managed. It's learning to sit in silence. One Piece doesn't need an introduction. Not anymore. After more than 2 decades, after 1,000 episodes, after arcs that felt like entire lifetimes, it's no longer a show you explain. It's a presence, a constant, the kind of story that has outlived relationships, jobs, versions of yourself you barely recognize. And now it's in Elbaf, the island of giants, the place Usopp has dreamed about since the very beginning, the mythology that's been whispered about for 25 years, and the arrival there doesn't feel triumphant, it feels inevitable, like watching someone finally open a door they've been standing in front of their entire life. Elbaf represents something fundamental about One Piece that newer fantasy anime are only beginning to understand: the importance of waiting. Of letting a story breathe across years, across versions of itself, across shifts in tone and animation and cultural relevance. Oda has never rushed toward his ending. He's never treated his story like a product with a deadline. He's treated it like a living thing. And Elbaf is the culmination of that patience. But patience isn't passive. It's a choice, a commitment. And for the audience, it's a test. Because to watch One Piece reach Elbaf is to confront how much time has passed. How much of your own life has moved forward while this story continued? The version of you that started this journey doesn't exist anymore, and yet, here you are, still watching, still caring, still believing that Luffy's dream means something. That's not nostalgia, that's something deeper. It's the recognition that some stories don't end, they evolve, and the people who follow them evolve with them. The new wave of fantasy anime understands this. It understands that fantasy isn't about escape, it's about endurance. It's about staying with a story even when it hurts, even when it changes, even when it asks you to wait years for a single island. And Elbaf, in all its mythic weight, is a statement, not about world building or lore, about commitment, about what it means to keep a promise across decades. Witch Hat Atelier is different. Where One Piece sprawls, Witch Hat Atelier focuses. Where One Piece builds across years, Witch Hat Atelier builds across pages, and now, across frames. It's a story about magic, yes, but more than that, it's a story about systems, about rules, about the invisible structures that decide who gets to create and who gets to suffer. Coco is a child who wanted to be a witch, and the world told her no, not because she lacked talent, not because she lacked will, but because she wasn't born into the right family, because magic, in this world, is not a gift, it's a privilege, and privilege, once you see it, cannot be unseen. The brilliance of Witch Hat Atelier is how quietly it approaches this. There's no grand villain monologuing about oppression. There's no revolution being planned in shadowed rooms. There's just a girl drawing sigils in a book, trying to learn a language the world has decided she has no right to speak. And the adaptation is going to make that silence louder. Because animation does something prose cannot. It makes stillness visible. It gives weight to the moments between words. When Coco draws her first glyph, when the ink settles, when the magic responds, those aren't just plot points. They are acts of defiance rendered in light and color and sound. The new wave of fantasy anime isn't interested in spectacle for its own sake. It's interested in what spectacle means, in what it costs, in who gets to wield it and who gets erased by it. Witch Hat Atelier is a fantasy about gatekeeping, about the quiet violence of rules that seem neutral but serve power. And in adapting it, the anime medium is being asked to do something difficult, to make systemic oppression feel intimate. to make the denial of dreams feel as visceral as any battle, and it will, because the story demands it. Read Zero is entering its 4th season, and with it comes the Volagayan Empire arc. For those who have followed Subaru's journey, this isn't just another arc, it's a departure, a fracture, because for the first time, Subaru is truly alone. No Emilia, no REM who remembers him, no support network, just him, his curse, and a warring empire that doesn't care about his suffering. Read Zero has always been about death, about repetition, about the horror of trying and failing and trying again until your mind fractures under the weight of all the versions of yourself that didn't make it. But the Volagayan arc is about something worse. It's about purpose, because Subaru, for all his suffering, has always had a reason to return, someone to save, someone to protect, a goal that justified the agony of resurrection. But in Volagaia, that clarity is gone. He's not the hero. He's not even the protagonist of his own story anymore. He's a pawn in someone else's war, dying and reviving in a conflict that doesn't care about his existence. And that might be the cruelest thing Read Zero has ever done. It's not the gore, it's not the psychological torture, it's the removal of meaning, the absence of a thread to hold onto, the realization that suffering, when it serves no purpose, is just suffering. The new wave of fantasy anime is willing to go there, to strip away the comforts, to ask what happens when the loop doesn't lead to growth, when death doesn't teach a lesson, when pain is just pain. And Read Zero Season 4 is going to force its audience to sit with that, to watch Subaru deteriorate not because he's weak, but because he's been asked to carry a weight no human was meant to bear. It's not entertaining, it's not satisfying, it's honest. And honesty, in fantasy, is rare. There's a pattern emerging across these stories. One Piece, Witch Hat Atelier, Read Zero. They are all, in their own ways, interrogating the foundations of fantasy itself. One Piece asks, what does it mean to chase a dream for decades? Witch Hat Atelier asks, who gets to create, and why? Read Zero asks, what happens when suffering loses its meaning? These aren't questions fantasy used to ask. Fantasy used to be about the journey, the adventure, the triumph, the hero rising, the villain falling, the world saved. But the new wave is different. It's about the cost, not the dramatic cost, not the sacrifice that gets rewarded with victory, the real cost, the years spent waiting, the systems that crush potential, the cycles that break minds. And it's doing this without losing the wonder. That's the important part. These stories still believe in magic. They still believe in dreams. They still believe in the possibility of something better. But they've stopped pretending it's easy. Witch Hat Atelier, when it airs, is going to be a test for the medium. Because it's a slow story, a thoughtful story, a story where the action is in the learning, in the drawing, in the quiet rebel lion of a girl refusing to accept the world's no. Modern anime often struggles with slow. It compensates with flash, with speed, with cutting between storylines to maintain momentum. But Witch Hat Atelier can't afford that. Its power is in the patience, in watching Coco's hand move across parchment, in seeing the concentration in her eyes as she tries to understand something the world has told her is forbidden. The manga understands this. Every panel breathes. Every page turn is earned. The anime will need to trust that same rhythm, to let scenes linger, to resist the urge to fill silence with sound, to believe that watching someone learn is as compelling as watching someone fight. And if it succeeds, it will prove something vital about fantasy storytelling, that you don't need to raise the stakes to raise the tension. You just need to make the audience care about the smallest victories. A perfectly drawn GLYPH, a lesson understood, a moment where a teacher sees a student not as a threat to the system, but as a person worth nurturing. These are the victories that matter in Witch Hat Atelier, and in adapting them, the anime is being asked to redefine what fantasy can be. Not epic, intimate. One Piece reaching Elbaf feels different because it's not just about plot, it's about acknowledgement. For years, Usopp has been the liar, the coward, the weakest link, the one who talks big and runs away. And he knows this, he's always known this, but he's also the one who dreams of Elbaf, who dreams of warriors, of giants, of courage that isn't forced but inherent. And now he's there, not as a warrior, not as someone who's conquered his fear, but as someone who kept moving forward despite it. That's what Elbaf represents, not the destination, the endurance, the fact that Usopp, after everything, is still here, still dreaming, still lying about his courage while somehow embodying it in the only way he knows how. One Piece has always been about inherited will, about dreams passed down, about the way stories shape the people who hear them. And Elbaf is the culmination of that theme because it's the island where myth meets reality, where the stories Usopp told himself as a child finally stand in front of him, massive and real and undeniable. And the question becomes, what do you do when your dream stops being a story and becomes something you have to face? That's the weight the new wave of fantasy carries. It's not about the adventure anymore. It's about the confrontation, the moment where you realize the thing you've been chasing has been waiting for you the entire time. And you're not ready, you're never ready, but you go anyway. Read Zero's 4th season is going to hurt, not because of the violence, because of the absence. Subaru's suffering has always had an audience. REM, Emilia, even Beatrice. People who witnessed his struggle, even if they didn't understand it. People who gave his pain a context, a purpose, a reason to endure. But in Vologear, that's gone. No one knows him. No one cares about his deaths. No one is counting his resurrect irons. He's alone in a way he's never been before, dying in a war that would continue with or without him. And that isolation is going to translate into something the anime medium does better than any other: emptiness. Empty frames, empty soundscapes, empty eyes, because Read Zero understands that horror isn't in the monster, it's in the lack of response. It's in screaming and hearing nothing back. It's in dying and waking up and realizing no one noticed you were gone. The new wave of fantasy anime is embracing this emptiness. It's learning that silence is a narrative tool, that absence can be more powerful than presence, that sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to a character is remove the audience from their suffering. Subaru is going to die alone, over and over, and the anime is going to make sure we feel every second of that solitude, not because it's cruel, because it's true. There's a reason these stories are arriving now, in this moment. In this cultural space where patience feels impossible and everything demands immediate resolution. They are arriving because we need them, not as escape, as reflection. One Piece teaches endurance across decades. Witch Hat Atelier teaches the quiet rebel lion of learning. ReZero teaches survival without meaning. These are not comfortable lessons. They are not designed to make us feel good. They are designed to make us feel seen. Because fantasy, at its best, isn't about other worlds. It's about this one. Refracted, reimagined, given the distance necessary to finally see it clearly, and the new wave understands that. It understands that the audience has changed, that we're older now, more tired, more aware of the weight we carry, that we don't need heroes who never break. We need heroes who break constantly and keep moving anyway. Luffy is going to face something in Elbaf that challenges the core of his dream. Coco is going to learn that magic is not freedom but responsibility. Subaru is going to discover that resurrection is not power but punishment. And we're going to watch, not because it's entertaining, because it's necessary, because these stories are teaching us how to endure. Witch Hat Atelier's magic system is rules. Explicit, unbreakable rules. You draw the GLYPH correctly or nothing happens. You follow the structure or the spell fails. And that's terrifying. Because it means magic is not intuitive, it's learned, it's practiced, it's something you can fail at, over and over, until you understand the language well enough to make it respond, and that makes it real, not in the sense of existing, in the sense of effort, in the sense that Coco's journey is not about discovering she's special, it's about working until she becomes capable. That's a radical statement for fantasy. Most magic is innate, chosen ones, bloodlines, destiny, but Witch Hat Atelier says, no. Magic is a skill, and skills can be taught, and if they can be taught, then the people who hoard that knowledge are not guardians, they are oppressors. The anime adaptation is going to make that visual. It's going to show the labor of learning, the failed attempts, the smudged ink, the erasures, the moment where Coco's hand cramps and she has to stop, not because the story demands it, but because bodies have limits, and in showing that, it's going to make magic feel more powerful than any explosion ever could. Because the magic isn't in the result, it's in the refusal to stop trying. One Piece, Witch Hat Atelier, Read Zero. 3 different stories, 3 different approaches to fantasy, but they share something essential. They believe in their audiences. They believe we can handle slow pacing. They believe we can sit with discomfort. They believe we can watch a character fail, and die, and struggle, and not need it resolved in 22 minutes. They believe we're capable of endurance. And maybe that's the real shift. The real new wave, not in the stories themselves, but in the trust they place in the people watching them. Because fantasy used to patronize, it used to assume we needed clear answers, moral simplicity, victories that felt earned within the runtime. But these stories don't. They assume we understand that life is long, that growth is slow, That meaning is something you build, not something you find, and they are willing to take years to prove it. Elbaf is not the end of One Piece. It's a step, one island among many, but it's the island that makes everything before it matter, because it's the proof that Usopp's dream was never silly, that the lies he told himself were never just lies, that the courage he performed, even when he was terrified, was real courage all along. And when the anime finally shows him standing on that shore, looking up at the giants he's imagined his entire life, it's not going to be triumphant. It's going to be quiet, because triumph is loud, but recognition is quiet, and recognition of dreams, of effort, of the distance traveled, is what the new wave of fantasy is learning to honor. The future of fantasy storytelling is not about innovation. It's about honesty. It's about admitting that the journey is longer than we thought, that the systems are harder to break than we imagined, that the suffering doesn't always lead somewhere meaningful, and it's about continuing anyway. One Piece continues, Witch Hat Atelier continues, ReZero continues, not because they have to, because they believe the story is worth finishing. And in a world that constantly tells us to give up, to move on, to find something easier, that belief is revolutionary. These stories are teaching us how to stay, how to endure, how to keep drawing the glyph even when our hand cramps, how to keep sailing even when the island seems impossible, how to keep resurrecting even when death has lost its meaning. They are teaching us that the story doesn't end when it gets hard, it ends when we stop believing it matters. And we haven't stopped, not yet. There's a weight to what comes next, to these adaptations, these seasons, these arcs we've been waiting for, but the weight is not a burden. It's a reminder that some stories are worth the wait, that some dreams take decades, that some lessons require us to die 1,000 deaths before we understand them. And when Witch Hat Atelier airs, when One Piece reaches the heart of Elbaf, when ReZero descends into Volagir's emptiness, we'll be there. Not because we're obsessed, not because we're trapped, because we chose to stay. And that choice, more than any magic, more than any adventure, more than any resurrection, is the most powerful thing fantasy can offer. The belief that staying matters, that endurance is its own form of heroism, that the story, and the people who follow it, are worth seeing through to the end. Even when the end is still years away, even when the path is unclear, even when all we have is the next episode, the next chapter, the next breath, we stay, and in staying, we become part of the story, not as observers, as witnesses, to the weight of what comes next, and the quiet courage it takes to keep watching.